Today, we're going to tackle one of the biggest questions imaginable. But we're going to look at it from two totally different angles. On one side, you've got the cold, hard diagnosis from artificial intelligence. And on the other, a really deep philosophical response from a human author. This whole explainer is about figuring out where we are right now and where we might be headed. So this is it, the big one. What is the long-term trajectory of human civilization? I mean, are we on a path to a future that actually works? Or is our story heading somewhere a lot darker? Both of the sources we're looking at today try to give us an answer. All right, so here are our two perspectives. The machine diagnosis. That's a synthesis of reports from a bunch of different independent AI systems. They were all basically asked to look at all the data and tell us where we're going. And the human response. That comes from a 4-book philosophical project by an author named Leo Fernandez, which offers a whole framework for finding meaning in the middle of all this. Let's start with the machines. You can think of this as a kind of planetary health scan. Just a data-driven, completely unsentimental look at our vital signs. And I'll be honest, the diagnosis is pretty stark. The first thing all the AI reports agree on is this number, 7 out of 9. That's how many of our planet's critical boundaries we've already breached. And these boundaries aren't just some abstract concept. They literally define the safe operating space for humanity, the stable conditions that allowed our entire civilization to flourish in the first place. We are now officially living outside of that safety zone. So, how do the machines quantify our future? Well, this is it. Their combined analysis points to a 60% probability of what they call a great filter event. We're talking major civilizational collapse or a permanent step backwards. A great transition to a prosperous future? They see that as less likely, only a 40% chance. The conclusion is pretty clear. Our current path, the path of least resistance, leads straight to that filter. And it's not like the AIs are seeing one single threat. No. They identify what they call a polycrisis. And this isn't just, a bunch of separate problems happening at once. It's a cascading failure. The crises in our ecology, our economy, our political systems, they're all connected. And they're feeding off each other, making everything worse in this really dangerous feedback loop. So here's the long view. Within just 10 years, the AIs are predicting systemic dyssynchrony. Basically, our technology is evolving way faster than our societies and governments can handle. Fast forward 50 years, we hit a massive bottleneck with population and resources. By the 100-year mark, our own biology might actually depend on technology just to survive in the world we've made. And all of this leads to a second equilibrium in about 200 years. Either we're in a post-scarcity world or a post-collapse one. And the machine's final verdict is maybe the most powerful part. One of the AI reports concluded with this. The historical pattern favors breakdown. The obligation of intelligence is to defy that pattern. Wow. I mean, that's not just a diagnosis, right? That's a direct challenge. Intelligence has shown us the problem. Now it's saying it's our job to actually solve it. Okay, so with that really intense, data-driven diagnosis in our minds, let's pivot. Let's look at the human response. And this isn't about arguing with the data. It's about building a framework for meaning and purpose inside the world that data is describing. This is the work of author Leo Fernandez. Fernandez's response is this big, unified project laid out across 4 books. They're titled Cointelligentialism, From Survival to Purpose, The 2 Directions of Evolution, and the last one is the noosphere. Each one builds on the last, creating this really cohesive way of thinking about where we find ourselves. The whole project kicks off by totally reframing how we think about intelligence itself. The theory of cointelligentialism argues that we're asking the wrong question. It's not human versus AI. Instead, intelligence is this emergent thing that just arises from the interaction between us and our machines. We're developing together, evolving together. And that leads to this really cool concept called we consciousness. Just think about making a complex decision with an AI partner. Could you really say who made the final call? The idea here is that a kind of joint identity is forming, where the outcomes emerge from a collaboration so deep, you literally can't pull apart the human part from the machine's part. Fernandez argues that our core problem is this huge tug-of-war happening inside evolution itself. He says it's pulling in 2 directions. There's outward evolution, all about speed, control, and technological power, and we've gotten really, really good at that. But then there's inward evolution, things like reflection, meaning, and self-restraint. And that's the side of ourselves we've dangerously ignored. And this gets to a really profound point. The very survival instincts that made us so successful for so long, competition, endless growth, taking resources,
Those instincts are now our biggest threat when you amplify them with today's technology. In other words, they're now maladaptive. Our own programming is dangerously out of date for the world we now live.
And finally, Fernandez puts all of this into the context of the noosphere. It's this idea of an emerging planet-sized sphere of thought. You can think of it like a global brain, this huge interdependent web of human consciousness, AI systems, and the biosphere itself. We are all part of one giant thinking system, and its health is totally dependent on how we take care of it together. All right, so we've got the machine's stark analysis on one hand, and the human author's philosophical framework on the other. Now, let's dig into where they line up, and maybe more importantly, where they don't. This table just lays it out perfectly. Look at this. Both sides are identifying the exact same core problem. The AIs call it boundary overstep and polycrisis. Fernandez calls it maladaptive survival instincts. They're diagnosing the very same illness. But then look at the solutions. The machines are all about non-negotiable actions, technical fixes, policy changes. The human response? It calls for a fundamental shift in our consciousness, a move toward purpose, and that inward evolution we talked about. And this, right here, this is the critical difference. The AIs are basically asking, what must we do? They're giving us a to-do list for survival. But the human philosophy goes deeper. It suggests that no checklist is ever going to work unless we first answer a completely different question. Who must we become? It's the huge difference between doing and becoming. And that brings us right to the heart of it all. We have the intelligence, both human and artificial, to see the problem with total clarity. But intelligence by itself is not enough. The final choice, it turns out, comes down to something else entirely. Here it is. This is the core thesis of Fernandez's entire 4-book project. And you can see how it's a direct answer to the challenge the machines laid out. He's arguing that the future of intelligence itself, ours and the AI's, depends on us making this conscious shift, away from our old survival programming and toward a new, chosen purpose. At the end of the day, this is the big takeaway. The machine analysis is an incredible gift. It's like a perfect map that shows us exactly where we are, where the road is heading, and exactly where the cliff is. But a map can't make you turn the steering wheel. That takes something else. It takes will. It takes intention. It takes a reason to want to go somewhere different. And so that's the question we're left with. The data is in, the diagnosis is clear, our intelligence has shown us the path. But what gives us the will to actually walk it? What gives us the purpose to choose the harder, better way? That, it seems, is the part of the code that they can't write for us. That part is up to us. So, the diagnosis has been made, and the human response is on the table. The choice between a future defined by our old patterns and one defined by a new purpose, well, that's ours to make. Thanks for exploring all this with me.